Hi, today we're going to talk about igniting your creative spark. Today we're going to talk about the new area of study, talk about creative writing and what it means to plan, write, refine and reflect on your creative process and get you excited about this area of study. Hi, I'm Victoria Buzzard. Today I'm going to be talking you through an introduction to creating texts. I'm one of the presenters for this course. If you're doing writing about country, you will see me present the rest of the videos, but you will also see other presenters for the other frameworks of ideas. So today we're going to talk about what creating texts is all about. What's in this lesson? So today we're going to understand the study design, look at the purpose of the mentor texts. We're going to talk a bit about how to actually create a text. We're also going to discuss what the exam is going to look like, given this is a new area of study. We're going to talk about the SACs. There are going to be 2 SACs on this area of study. Finally, we're going to talk about how to use this Edrolo course effectively. Let's start by talking about the study design. We always need to start with the study design because that is what VCEE is telling us you need to do as students. So let's look at it for English students and EAL students. It's similar for both English and EAL students in that on the completion of this unit, students should be able to demonstrate effective writing skills by producing their own texts. That part is exactly the same for both English and EAL, and you're designed to respond to a specific context, audience, to achieve a stated purpose, and then explain those decisions made through writing processes. So that's for English students. That's the difference there, is that for English students, you will explain the decisions made through the writing processes, and that will be in the form of a reflective commentary. For EAL students, again, you will be responding to specific context, audience for a stated purpose, but you will comment on these decisions made through writing processes. So rather than explain, you will comment in the form of annotations. So this might look like you've written a text and then you will get a different coloured pen. Maybe you'll print it out, you'll get some coloured pens and you'll draw arrows and you'll highlight different sort of language features you've used, and then you'll annotate and comment on those decisions you made through the writing processes. Whereas for English students, you will need to write a reflective commentary where you will justify in probably between about 500 to 600 words, but your teachers will provide you with more guidance on that, and you'll have to justify in more detail the specific choices you made as a writer in coming up with your text. So for both English and EAL students, you will achieve the outcome by drawing on the knowledge and related skills in this area of study. So let's look at the key knowledge that's required for this study design. Firstly, key knowledge is understanding the role of the mentor texts. And we're really looking at the mentor texts as models of effective and cohesive writing. So that really means that they're an excellent example of what good writing looks like, and you're going to use that as inspiration for your text. Then there's vocabulary, text structures, language features, which are used in an effective and cohesive writing. Then there's the ways purpose, context, including mode and audience-shaped writing. So for example, you might choose to create a speech, which would be the mode or the text type. You would then have to think about the context. Where do you want to deliver that speech? What year do you want to present that speech in? Who's your audience? And what's your purpose? Are you arguing or are you explaining? Then the range of ideas presented in various ways in mentor texts, the different language modes and their effects on structure and meaning, and the ways the purpose of the author hones the use of language. So that's a really important word there, the word hones, because purpose and language are not disconnected. They need to be unified. Your purpose and your language need to speak with one another and they should inform each other. So if you're writing to argue, then the language that you use is going to be argumentative in its nature. Strategies to generate and develop ideas is another aspect of key knowledge. Writing processes. This is really important for this area of study, and that includes drafting, refining and considering feedback. There are many important stages in this area of study, and drafting and thinking is a really important one, and then so is the refining and reflecting stage. Something that's going to be really valuable as well is the value of collaboration and discussion. I would highly recommend you discuss your ideas with your teacher, with your peers, and those around you so that you are able to articulate your ideas and improve them before you write. Then also standard and non-standard conventions of language, including syntax, punctuation, and spelling, is going to be important. In terms of key skills, this is similar to key knowledge, but this is more about what you are doing rather than what you are understanding. So I'll go through this a little bit more quickly, but essentially it's very similar to what we've discussed. It's reading and exploring the mentor texts to understand the mechanics of effective and cohesive writing. You first need to be able to understand the mechanics of effective writing for you to be able to then mirror that effective writing yourself in your own texts. You're going to experiment with vocab, text structures and language features for effective and cohesive writing. Another key skill is to create texts with a stated purpose. And there are 4 key purposes that VCAR are directing you towards. They are to express, to reflect, to explain, or to argue. It's really important that you understand the differences between those 4 purposes, and the study design also provides more information about that. You may also want to consider doing a hybrid of purposes. Sometimes you might be reflecting and expressing, or you might be explaining and arguing. You don't have to just stick to one purpose. You can have a hybrid of purposes, but you need to be clear exactly what you're trying to achieve. Also, then you need to have an understanding of context, including your mode and audience. This is a really important step in understanding the key skills for this area of study. Other key skills include to select and apply writing processes. So that means things like you might decide to spend some time planning, to think, to draft, to brainstorm, to refine, and so forth. You will generate and use ideas, discuss and develop and extend ideas. Class discussions are going to be really useful for that. You will explore and employ voices appropriate to purpose, context, mode, and audience. VCAR have indicated that voice is really important to score well in this area of study. So they want to see you trying to cultivate your own voice. And voice is something that's a little tricky to understand, but it's essentially the character or the personality of your piece. And that is influenced a lot by your writing choices that you use. You will also experiment with and extend vocabulary for effective and cohesive writing. You will plan, you will create, you will draft, you will refine and complete individual writing tasks. You will also collaborate and provide feedback in class through listening and speaking with peers and teachers. You will explain and comment on the vocabulary, text structures, language features, conventions and ideas in your own writing, and that's where the reflective commentary comes through. You will reflect on and share the implications of authorial choices in your own writing and the writings of others, and you will then apply standard and non-standard conventions of language, syntax, punctuation, and spelling. So that's spelling and grammar, punctuation, so forth. That's where editing and refining is also going to be really useful. So those are the key skills for this area of study. Let's talk about the purpose of the mentor texts in a little bit more detail. One of the reasons VCAR have assigned the mentor text is to expose students to a range of writing types. And you will notice that there are different writing types within each of the mentor texts. For example, one mentor text might be a short story, another is a speech, another is an essay. And that's been done for a very deliberate reason, to expose you to different types of writing types so that you can choose which types you prefer and therefore which types of texts you might want to create. Another reason for the mentor text is to deepen understanding of the specific framework being studied. For example, if you're doing writing about protest as your framework, it will help you understand different aspects of protest, different reasons why people do protest, different outcomes of protesting, both positive and perhaps negative outcomes that might come about. So the mentor text will help you understand not only the writing of what good writing looks like, but also how to develop and sustain an idea. In addition, The purpose of the mentor text is to understand how texts are created with a specific audience, purpose, and form in mind, and also to study and appreciate literary and stylistic features from the texts. If you're able to appreciate literary and stylistic features from the text, you are then going to be able to more easily mimic some of those in your own text and also feel a desire to mimic it because you'll see how effectively it works. So, for instance, if one of the mentor texts uses magical realism, you might want to go learn more about magical realism and then try and use that in your own writing. So just a tip as well, you want to use the mentor text as an inspiration, but you also need to ensure that your idea for your text is original and well planned. You don't want to copy the mentor text. The mentor texts are there as a guide, as a mentor, but they're not there to simply mimic entirely. You need to bring original thinking and planning to your writing. How to create a text. Let's break it down. First, you want to start by considering the framework. Which aspect of the framework of ideas do you wish to engage with? For example, if you were doing country, writing about country, you might want to engage with the natural world. You could draw a lot of inspiration from the beauty of the natural world. It doesn't have to be Australia, but it certainly could be with writing about country. You could draw a lot of inspiration from the beaches and the fact that we're an island. So that could be sort of your starting point. Once you've sort of figured out which part of the framework you like, you can then sort of zero in on which part of the framework you want to engage with. Then you want to focus on the idea and concept in more depth, and you want to narrow down a more specific idea or concept. So you might be interested in exploring the natural world, but looking at how the natural world is threatened. You might want to look at environmental destruction or deforestation as your sort of specific idea or concept within the framework that you want to focus in on. And obviously, depending on what framework you're doing, the idea and concept is going to relate to that. So, for example, if you were doing writing about protest as your framework, you might focus in on a specific aspect of protest. It could still be the environment. It could be protesting about climate change and climate change in action, for example. But it would be something specific to protest. Next, you want to consider context, form, audience, and purpose. And you want to consider the most effective context, form, audience, and purpose to convey your ideas and express yourself successfully. You want to set yourself up for success. So you want to pick a form, audience, and purpose and context that's going to suit you and feel true and authentic to you. Because they often say in creative writing, you should write what you know. So you want to stick to something that you're passionate about and something you feel that you can write about in depth. That doesn't mean that you don't need to research. You will need to do research, and you will need to go about reading and understanding your idea in more depth in order to develop it. Next, you want to focus on the stimulus. So you are going to be given different stimuli, and you have to address at least one of the stimulus that's provided. There are likely to be 3 stimulus on the exam, VCA have told us. Most likely 1 visual and 2 written, and you will need to either address all of them or pick one. You will need to select the stimulus or stimuli you want to respond to. Then what you need to do is internalize it. So that really means you need to think about it deeply, and you need to figure out the best way you want to approach it. Next is title. There will also be a title provided, and you need to choose how you will use the title and how you plan to incorporate it in your text. You might choose to use it as a title for your piece. You might want to modify the title. So if the title was My Country is Calling, you might simply use it, My Country is Calling, but then you want to sort of address that idea throughout the piece at least a few times to show that you haven't just put it at the top of your piece and then forgotten about it. It needs to also inform your piece. But VCA have also said you don't have to use it as the title. It can just inform your piece. So you can almost use it a bit like an additional stimuli. So if you were using My Country is Calling, you might change that a little bit and say, My country is calling, should I answer? And then within your piece, you're kind of unpacking this idea of, should you answer? Why should you answer? Is there any urgency around that? So it's important to understand that the examiners are really looking to see that you are internalizing the stimuli and the title and you're using it to guide your piece. They don't want to read pieces that are just pre-written where students have just come in knowing what they want to write and just written it down and then tried to vaguely include the stimulus and title. It needs to really inform your piece of writing. So that's a really key message I want you to understand. So this is sort of a good formula to help you understand how to create a text. And it deliberately starts with the framework being broader because that's a broader concept. And then each aspect of the sort of the diagram becomes smaller because it becomes more specific and narrow. So I hope you use this to help you guide your planning and thinking about creating a text. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the writing process now. I think something you need to understand is that thinking is actually the most important stage of writing, and it will likely take the longest as well. You should probably try to spend about 40% of your time on the thinking stage before you even get to the writing stage, which I'm sure will shock some of you, but it's actually an incredibly important aspect of the writing process. And this includes thinking internally in your own thoughts and brain, but also brainstorming on paper and collaborating with others. Once you've gone through the thinking stage, writing involves writing a draft. Your teachers will give you guidance about the word limit that they want you to use for your SACs, but probably for the examination, you're aiming for about 800 to 1,000 words. Then you want to focus on refining. So refining is what you do after you've written your first draft. And this involves rereading your writing. It involves seeking input from others, including your teacher, and considering what's working well and what can be improved. Think of your teacher for this area of study like your editor. You're the writer and they're the editor, guiding your writing, helping you think about, what to cull, what to expand, what to include, how you can improve your writing and so forth. Then finally, the next stage is reflecting. Reflecting requires you to write a commentary on your own creative choices and justify why you chose your form, audience, purpose, and premise. And justify is an important verb there because you are really going into exactly why you chose that context and how you think that's going to be effective for your specific audience and purpose. It's not just explaining it, it's analysing it in a lot of depth and explaining exactly why you've done that. And you will justify why you chose specific language techniques as well. All right, let's talk about the exam now. The exam is always something that's daunting for students, especially when there's a new area of study on the exam. But VCAR have provided us with some great reassurance in providing us with a sample exam excerpt. So I want to go through the information that's been provided and hopefully reassure you about what the exam is going to look like. So the exam will require you to plan and create a writing piece. This writing piece should be original, considered, and carefully executed. So you will be given a title, like the one on the right. So you can see over there that this is an example of what the exam would look like for writing about protest. Obviously, the real exam will be different, but this is just an idea of what it would look like. So they've provided a title there called Listen. And then you will be provided with 3 stimulus materials relating to your framework of ideas. And you will need to use the title and at least one of the stimuli in your response. You might choose to use one stimulus. You might choose to use, for example, stimulus 1, mighty oaks from small acorns grow. Or you might choose to use the image, stimulus 2, with the tape being pulled, or it looks like being pulled off the mouth there. Or you might choose to use stimulus 3, for example, which is a quote there. It's not about if we want or if we can, because if we won't and if we don't, a time may come when we can't. So you might choose stimulus 3, you might choose stimulus 2 or 1, or you might use all of them in different ways throughout your piece. And you can see the directions provided there. write a text that explores ideas about protest. You must use the title provided, and you must use at least one of the following stimuli. So it's important to remember that you won't have seen the stimuli prior to the exam. So you are going to need to be flexible and adapt your writing on the day. You do not want to pre-prepare a response. You may have ideas in mind for what you want to include and how you want to respond. You might have a few different ideas, but then you would need to tailor it and you need to pick the best idea that you could respond to for the stimuli that you are given on the day. Now, it's important to note, and the Chief Assessors clarified this in the Meet the Assessors information, that you do not need to directly refer to the title or the stimulus chosen. But it should be clear that they have heavily, and I mean heavily, influenced your writing. It needs to be obvious to the marker that you're responding to it. And I would say that it is useful to directly refer to the stimuli or title at least some of the time. You can use any form of writing you like, except you cannot use songs, poetry, or verse. They are not accepted forms. But you could use a podcast, you could use a speech, you could write an opinion piece, you could write a memoir, a short story. So there are a lot of options available to you. You need to make sure that you have read and engaged with the mentor texts and considered the ideas and techniques within them. The examiners will be looking for evidence of this in your writing. Let's talk about the criteria. This is the criteria that's been provided, which they will be using to mark this section of the exam. Obviously, the criteria goes from 10 out of 10 down to 0 out of 10, but for the sake of the slide, we've just included the criterions for 9 to 10, 8, 7, and 6. So let's look at the 3 different dot points that they're assessing you on. Firstly, the first dot point demonstrates insightful consideration of the ideas raised by the title and stimuli. So then if you look at the next marking section down, number 8, it's an astute exploration of the ideas. And then for 7 out of 10, it's a detailed connection. And then for 6 out of 10, it's a clear connection. So you can see that as those numbers go up higher, the consideration of ideas being explored is deeper. But all of them require you to address the title and stimuli. So, for example, if you just wrote a really nice idea, but it had nothing to do with the title or stimuli, then you wouldn't be able to be rewarded for that. So it's important to remember that the title and stimulus are incredibly important. Let's look at the second dot point now. So that's about the text itself. So for 9 to 10 out of 10, students would create a cohesive text. So that means that the text is really well structured, it's really fluent, it all flows and it all works together with an explicit purpose and appropriate voice. Then you can see for 8 out of 10, it's a coherent text. For 7 out of 10, it's a coordinated text. And for 6 out of 10, it's a connected text. All of those relate to that idea of purpose and voice as well. But you can see there that 9 out of 10, there's something about that text that just works in a very effortless manner. Then finally, the last dot point is really about your language that you've used. So how sophisticated is the language? So 9 out of 10 is sophisticated control of language, the text structure, and it makes a rich use of vocabulary. Then 8 out of 10, it's confident control of language. Then 7 out of 10, it's a sound control. There's control, but it's not entirely controlled. And then 6 out of 10, it's clear control. So I hope this helps you understand what the examiners are looking for in the examination. Let's talk about the SACs now. Some essential information about the SACs for you to understand. The first thing to understand about this area of study is that you will be doing 2 SACs on this area of study for Unit 3. So you can see there that for the outcome it says you need to demonstrate effective writing skills by producing your own text designed to respond to a specific context audience to achieve a stated purpose. And you can see there that the marks are 20 marks each for each text that you produce. So a written text will be produced. It will be constructed in consideration of audience, purpose, and context. Your school is going to provide you with more information on how these SACs are done and the conditions in which you complete these SACs. That will vary from school to school. But there will be 2 SACs on this area of study, 2 written texts. The text will need to be different. How different the texts need to be will depend on your school and the direction of your school, but there needs to be certainly differences in terms of the ideas and the purpose, audience and context coming through. The form may perhaps be similar or it may be different depending on the direction of your school, but there will certainly need to be differences between the 2 different SACs. Then for English students, you will explain the decisions made through writing processes, and that's worth 20 marks. So that's actually the same amount of marks as one of the texts that you're producing. So that's very important, and it's important to spend time understanding the commentary and doing your best effort for that. So the commentary will reflect on the writing processes that you have been through in the thinking, the planning, the writing, and the refining stage of writing. For EAL students, it's a little bit different. You won't be writing a commentary. You will comment on the decisions, but it's worth 10 marks instead of 20, and you will produce a set of annotations where you will reflect on the writing processes. So this might look like, for example, you've written a text, you've printed it out, then you've got some highlighters, some different coloured pens, and you highlight some of the features and you draw arrows and write annotations in explaining perhaps why you used a rhetorical question and the intended effect on your chosen audience. So that's some information about the SACs for this area of study. Finally, let's talk about how to use the Edrolo course. So key takeaway, the course is designed to support you in producing your own writing texts and reflecting on your writing using the skills you've developed throughout this area of study. And it's divided into 6 sections. So section 1 is this one here, introduction. This is what we're doing today. Then sections 2 to 5 will cover each of the various frameworks of ideas. So what you should do is navigate to the one that you're exploring in class. So for example, if you're doing writing about protest, then you will choose the section that relates to you, which is section 5. If you're doing writing about personal journeys, you would do section 2 and so forth. So within each section, there's an introduction to the framework. So for personal journeys, there's an introduction to personal journeys as a framework. And then there will be one lesson on each mentor text, and that will unpack its context, audience, purpose, form, and techniques employed. And then there will be videos on writing about each framework. So for example, for personal journeys, it would be using inspiration from the ideas, forms, and techniques explored in the mentor texts. That's the same structure in each of them. So writing about play, section 3, writing about country, section 4, and writing about protest, section 5. Then section 6 will cover the writing process itself, and it will provide lots of practical tips, sample pieces, and activities to prepare you for each stage. So within section 6, the writing process, which we've spoken a little bit about today, of thinking, writing, refining, and reflecting will be covered as well in various videos. So what's coming up next is sections 2 to 5, the framework of ideas.